Bow your heads, please.
Dear Jesus, I want to thank you for this day, God. I want to thank you for this opportunity that we can come and just learn. And Jesus, I just want to thank you for all of our teachers here that are just taking their time to teach us, God, what you have in store for us and what you want us to learn, Jesus. I pray that today will go well and everyone will have a safe trip here and a safe trip home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. All right, guys, let's go over your tests. And we'll actually, Xander, I've just been picking on you, so we're just going to keep picking. How's that? So Xander's going to tell us what an amniotic egg is, please.
It's a shell that, it's a water-retaining egg.
I like it. That's good. It's an egg that keeps its water in. Okay? Thank you. Would you tell us what hemotoxin is, please?
It's a venom that attacks the blood cells and blood tissue.
Good. Something about a venom that attacks either the blood cells or you could have said the circulatory system. Either way. Thank you very much. Daniel?
Isn't endotherm like regulating body?
Okay, good. An endothermic individual is warm-blooded, so they're able to regulate their own body temperature. Thank you very much. Josh, we're on placenta, please.
An organ that helps nourish the child that is attached to the mother.
Okay, so it's actually between the mother and the baby, and the nourishment flows across it. Thank you very much. Jason, gestation.
It's the time it takes for the pregnancy to last from conception to birth.
Good. It's the length of the pregnancy. Thank you very much. Number 2, please.
Vertebrate has a 4-chambered heart, lays amniotic eggs with a line-containing shell, and it has a light porous skeleton. Is it a reptile, bird, or mammal? Be a bird.
Definitely be a bird. Thank you, sir. Jonathan?
A vertebrate has dry, tough scales, a 3-chambered heart with a partial division in the ventricle, and it breathes with lungs. Is it a reptile, bird, or mammal? Reptile.
Good. Thank you very much. So I guess, Carrie, you're doing the next one, please.
A vertebrate has a 4-chambered heart, hair, and nourishes its young with its own milk. Is it a reptile, bird, or mammal? Mammal.
Thank you. It's a mammal. Keep going. Go ahead, Zach.
These are the reptile orders that contain current and living reptiles.
Oh, never mind, Zach. I won't torture you with that. I'll tell you what. You do number 6, okay? Just because I don't want you to have to suffer through saying all these. So A, tuatara, is in Rhynchocephalia. B, lizards, is in Squamata. C, crocodiles, is in Crocodilia. And D, turtles, is in Testudines. Okay? Thank you. So, Zach, you're going to do number 6 for us, please, sir.
A living vertebrate is endothermic. Is it possible that the vertebrate is a reptile? No.
Thank you, because reptiles are ectothermic, aren't they? Thank you very much. Josh?
What kind of feather has hooked barbules? Contour feathers or down feathers? Contour.
Thank you. Contour feathers. Thank you very much. We're up to you, Hannah.
You find an egg in your backyard. It is covered in a soft leathery shell. Is it a reptile egg or a bird egg?
Very good. Thank you. It would be a reptile egg. Number 4, please, Ryan. 9, please, Ryan. I'm sorry.
A bird's feathers become inflexible because the hooked barbules do not slide easily on the smooth barbules. What should the bird do to fix it? Start preening.
Good. Start preening. Remember, that's that oil gland near the tail that it runs through its feathers and straightens them out. Thank you very much. So up to Jordan.
Okay, a mammal lives in a cold climate and needs a lot of insulation. Will its guard hair or underhair be significantly thicker than the average mammals? Its underhair will be thicker?
Good. Its underhair is used for insulation, so that would be the case. Thank you.
I didn't bring my test, but I did my test.
Okay.
So should I read it?
Sure. Go ahead and read it for us. Thank you.
Two species of animals are very similar in appearance. The first species gives birth to offspring that have no hair. Their eyes are also closed. The second species gives birth to offspring that have full coat of hair. Their eyes are also open. Which species had a shorter gestation period? Should I guess?
Sure.
The second.
The one that's less developed would have the shorter gestation period. So in this case, the less developed one would be the one with the eyes closed and no hair. Good. That would be the shorter gestation. Thank you very much. Tim, you get to identify the structures.
Yep. A is the amnion, B is the
Allantois.
Atlantis, C is the yolk sac,
Albumin. Good. They are worth 4 points apiece. That includes A is worth 4, B is worth 4, C is worth 4. Okay, and then each of the vocabularies are worth 4. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and put that away and open up to 429, which is Module 14. We're starting into our study on plants. Page 429. So we're doing the plant kingdom. We're going to spend 4 weeks on it. This first chapter, we're going to be studying the anatomy of plants, which is the parts, and then how we classify plants. In the second chapter that we'll spend on it, so for the second 2 weeks, we're going to look at physiology, which physiology is actually studying how the different parts function, and then we're going to be studying the reproduction of the plants. When we do that, we're going to study flowers, and when you see that we're getting to the flower lab, if you have flowers available to you in your yard or someplace else where you're not going to get in trouble for taking them, don't want you coming in here with your mom's prized orchids and going, whoa. Okay, so, but if your parents say it's okay, maybe you have some hibiscus bushes or something like that that your parents don't mind you bringing some, it would be great if you could bring some that day. If you have multiples, if you could bring at least 6, that way each table could take a look at whatever you brought. I will be bringing flowers for that, but I just wanted to give you the heads up so that you can start scoping out which neighbors you're going to ask for flowers. No, I'm kidding. But start seeing what flowers you have available to you and think about that and bring that the day that we have the flower lab, if you would be so kind. Okay? And that's the cleanest dissection we'll ever do. It really is. All right, so we're going to start looking at botany today. I'm going to do my best with you on botany. It is not my best subject. I personally love plants. I love to eat them, and I love to look at them. But I didn't like my botany teacher in college, I have to admit. And so it really does mess it up for you when you study something under somebody you don't like. And I feel like it's such a shame now because I could really enjoy learning about how these things work. They're different than critters. I bet you knew that, though. Wait till you get to the reproduction. They're really different than critters. And so let's go ahead and look at some things on the study of plants. I know some of you are thinking, plants? I don't want to eat plants. But guys, if you like bread, if you like any kind of grain products, pasta, you're eating plant parts. You know, pretzels are even plant parts that have been processed, but that's plant parts. And then even if you're a steak person, guess what the cow ate? Plants. And so plants are really good for us. They're important, you know. What's another thing that plants do for us in general? Yes, sir?
Make oxygen.
They do make oxygen. Do they make the majority of the oxygen we breathe?
No.
No. Who does? Phytoplankton. Remember we learned about the diatoms way back, and we said that they actually produced 80% of the oxygen that we breathe. At least that's what the book said. And so phytoplankton actually makes the vast majority of the oxygen that we breathe. But plants do make some oxygen. And let's be honest, they're pretty. They just make things look nicer, don't they? Plants, you know, they do. So we like plants. Anyway, now, there's 2 basic ways that we separate the plants when we classify them. It's usually into woody and herbaceous. And herbaceous just sounds like herbs. Herbs, which are your plants that their stems are kind of wimpy, okay? That's an herb. Whereas it always makes me think of impatiens. You know those little flowers that everybody buys every spring and they put them in their driveways and all to make everything look pretty right around their driveways, and they come in all those cool colors and then they die. And you have to buy all new ones next year. Those are what I think of because they have a wimpy little stem, don't they? And so that's an herbaceous plant. Whereas a woody plant is a plant like a tree or even in some shrubs that if you broke the branch in the bush and it snaps like a woody snap, that would be a woody stem. And so there's this basic difference that we see between plants, whether they're woody or herbaceous. And actually we're going to learn about this the woody plants can grow year after year, whereas the herbaceous plants, best they're going to do is 2 years for you and then croak. And it's because they can't continue to grow those wimpy stems, because if it continues to grow, it actually breaks open and it's kind of like bleeding to death, you know, because the stem can't handle it. Yeah, that's a good picture, Kobe. I'm there, man. And so whereas with the woody ones, they're actually putting that woody material around it so they can continue to grow year after year. So that's a basic there. So let's look at some of the vocabulary that we've got here. And let's go ahead and start with perennial. And is it your turn to read, Michael? Would you read what a perennial plant is, please?
Plants that grow year after year.
Thank you. So from what I just described to you, would a perennial plant be woody or herbaceous? Woody. It's going to be woody, because remember, the wimpy ones are going to break open and bleed to death and croak. Okay, so that's going to be your woody plants, and that's why trees have wood around them, and that's why they can grow year after year. They're perennial. And so how about an annual?
Plants that live for only 1 year.
Thank you. That's a very logical name, isn't it? If you do something annually, you do it once a year, right? And I like that. It's so logical. It's an annual. 1 year and then it's gone. Kind of like those impatiens. Okay. And then would you tell us what a biennial is, please?
Plants that live for 2 years.
Thank you. And that one's kind of logical, too, because it's got the bi in it, which means two, like a bicycle has 2 wheels. And so the biennial lives for 2 years. The first year, it's busy storing food, and then the second year, it reproduces itself, and then it dies. And so once again, these would be your herbaceous plants, your annuals and your biennials. John, would you read for us what it says about a vegetative organ, please?
Parts of a plant, such as stems, roots, and leaves, that are not involved in reproduction.
Thank you, sir. And so the short version on vegetative organs would be stems, roots, and leaves. 3 words. If you make one of those funny little symbols for the and, right? Okay, so plants, roots, leaves. Those are your vegetative organs. And so we're not going to pick on Luke because he's just visiting us. So let's go on back. And Xander, would you tell us what reproductive plant organs are, please?
The parts of a plant, such as flowers, fruits, and seeds, involved in reproduction.
Thank you. So if you wanted to make it a short version again, you could put flowers, fruits, and seeds. In your mind, you're going to think reproduction. Now, be very, very clear. The real definition for fruits are actually a mature ovary. We're going to learn that in the next chapter, which is where the seeds are produced. So actually, anything that has a seed involved is really a fruit. Don't go to Publix or the grocery store and say that, though, because they're going to think you're a fruit. Because that would mean cucumbers are fruits. Peas and corn are fruits. Okay, why? Well, because there's reproductive orientation there, isn't it? They have seeds in them. And by a botanical definition, by a biological definition, a scientific one, which we all know, all us scientists are weird, by those definitions, fruits are anything that have seeds in them. But once again, at the grocery store, usually it's considered a vegetable if it's not sweet. And that's that difference of how we use our words. So vegetables, we would consider tomatoes and cucumbers and peas and corn as vegetables because they're not real sweet. And then we would think of things like strawberries and grapes and bananas and things that we think of as being more sweet, being fruits. That is not the case here. Okay, just so you know. Now, frequently I have biology students go home and torture their little brothers and sisters with this. Don't. Okay, don't go home and go, you're wrong. That's fruit. Don't. Okay, I don't want you doing that. See, some of you are back there going, man, I was planning on doing that. 2 Timothy says, God's servant doesn't argue. So just hang on to that one, guys. Don't go home and argue with that one, okay? Just remember, it's biological and botanical. It's not for going home torturing your little brother and sister. Yes?
What if we don't argue, but just state?
No. Don't do it. It's still argumentative. Yes, Jonathan?
What if we already did?
You really should go back and make peace. Okay. Go back and ask forgiveness for being argumentative, you know? All right, guys. So, let's continue on that page. We have 4 basic kinds of tissues that make up plants. And as you go through the chapter, you noticed on your own, he asked you what kind of tissue does this or that fall into. So you really kind of have to have a feel for what these 4 tissues are. The first type of tissue that can be found in a plant is meristematic. Meristematic. And I want you to notice in here the word stem. Do you see it? Now, stem cells are cells that are not yet differentiated. And I know that's a vocabulary word, but let's just back this up here a second. When a cell is differentiated, remember, every cell in your body that has a nucleus in it has the entire DNA library to make a whole nother you. Remember that? Same with a plant. Any cell in a plant that is nucleated, that has a nucleus, has all the DNA information to make a whole nother of that plant, to clone that plant. That's that idea. So, our eye cell, for some reason, only reads the eye books in the library and becomes an eye cell. Our heart cell only reads the heart books in our library and becomes a heart cell. Same with the skin cell. Same with the bone cell. Before they do that, when they're just a cell that has not chosen what it's going to be when it grows up, it's an undifferentiated cell. It's not different yet. You hear it? It's undifferent, undifferentiated. Okay? Once it has gone on the path to read the books to be a heart cell, an eye cell, a bone cell, then it's differentiated. It's different than everybody else. Do you see what those words mean? So a differentiated cell has already gone in the direction that it's going to be whatever it's going to be. It's different. An undifferentiated cell would be one that still can be whatever. It's what we would think of kind of as an embryonic cell or a stem cell. So meristematic tissue is tissue that's undifferentiated. It can still be anything. You can think of this, if nothing else, as merry stem cells. Okay? And so they still get to pick what they're going to be. They're very merry about that. All right? So meristematic tissue are these tissues that are undifferentiated. They can still turn into anything that the plant needs. The second one that's listed there is ground tissue. And this tissue, I'm just going to shorten tissue there and put it up here. Ground tissue basically is most of the stuff that makes up the plant. It tells you it's for storage of starches and oils, that it's involved in metabolism, it's involved in photosynthesis, it's involved in making the proteins, it's involved in supporting the plant. Oh my goodness, that's just about everything, isn't it? There's very few things that aren't going to be ground tissue. So if in doubt, write down ground tissue. No, I'm kidding. You should know how to do these. But that's the one that most things are going to fall into. And then the third one is dermal tissue, and if your dermis was showing, what would be showing?
Your skin.
Your skin, right? So the dermal tissue is like the skin, and that's going to be the very outermost layer of cells, just like it would be the skin for us, even though our skin is several layers thick. Just don't even go there. So with the plant, the dermal tissue is just that outer layer. That's it. And then the last one that he gives us is the vascular tissue. And I'm in my 50s, so when I hear vascular, I think of circulatory problems. Okay? I'm just at that age where people are dropping like flies around me, and it's like, So cardiovascular, that would be like heart disease and hardening of the arteries and all the lovely things Americans seem to want to die from. And so vascular makes me think of veins and arteries. And if that helps you remember it, vascular, veins, okay, veins and arteries. In our vascular system, that's what it is. In the plant's vascular system, the plant also has tubes through which the liquids flow. And so they act just like veins and arteries. And how I want you to remember them, so the whole class needs to do this with me. You people at home have to do it too. You are not exempt. Okay? So you ready? Everybody's going to go xylem. Everybody do this. Xylem phloem. Let's try it again. Xylem phloem. Now some of you are thinking, I know she's gone over the edge at this point. Okay. I went over the edge a long time ago. Trust me, ask anybody in my family. But the trick is this. You will find for the next 4 weeks, whenever you hit one of these questions, you're going to go xylem phloem. Okay? Why? Well, because xylem obviously carries the liquids up. And you know enough about plants to know that where's the liquid coming from? The roots. It's coming from the roots that are pulling them up. So xylem carries water and minerals from the ground up to the leaves. Phloem, if it's going down, then it's carrying the liquids from the leaves back down to the rest of the plant, and therefore it's going to be full of sugars like maple syrup, because the leaves are busy photosynthesizing, so they're going to be producing all that lovely sweet stuff and bringing it back down to feed the rest of the plant. So see, you guys can come up with a lot of information just knowing xylem and phloem, can't you? Right? And you're gonna want to hang on to that, okay? Everybody do it one more time. Xylem Flow. Next, we're going to break out in some VBS songs and things. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Makes you feel like, Father Abraham. Anyway, all right. Let's go on. We're going to skip the on your owns because we have a lot to do today. If you have a question on an on your own, please stop me. The next thing we look at on page 431 is we're going to look at the basic structure of the leaf. And I asked my dad to give me a couple. He has some big leaves in his yard, and so these are philodendron leaves, and this one's poor leaf. It needs more water, but it's a good-sized leaf, isn't it? So I was good for demonstration purposes. And so you guys will know these as elephant ears, yes. Right? Okay, it's a philodendron. Anyway, the things you need to know is, what do we call this portion of the leaf that would attach back to the stem? Petiole. Everybody say petiole. 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 Okay. So this is the petiole that attaches back to the stem. This is great. This is big enough you can actually see it. This would be the stipules, or stipules. I think it's stipules though. Nope, stipules. Okay, so this is what, it was the covering that the leaf was originally under before it came out. And then the very big part of the leaf that we think of as the leaf proper is actually the blade of the leaf. The point up here at the end would be called the apex. And it has veins in it, which you can see. I think that's all we needed to know about this. So the petiole, the stipules, the apex, the blade. Now this particular leaf, we'll turn to the next page. You got to learn a lot more about leaves. This one's only going to help us so far. This particular leaf is a simple leaf because it only has one blade on one petiole. If this, though, had a whole bunch of blades on every one petiole, remember the petiole is what hooks into the stem. So you kind of think of the petiole as the stem of the leaf, but it hooks into the stem of the plant. If you have one petiole with a whole bunch of blades on it, then it's a compound leaf. And I didn't bring any, but you've seen them around, I'm sure. Then right under that, it tells you about the three mosaics that a leaf can have. Mosaics are actually the arrangement of the leaf on the stem. And the reason that's important is because the job of the leaf is to photosynthesize. Leaves are food factories. That's their job. So they photosynthesize and they make the food for the plant. So they have to be arranged in such a way that they can catch as much light as possible. In the process of that, God designed them with these different arrangements so that they could catch more light. As you saw in your textbook, if they're arranged directly across from each other, that's called opposite. The most common one that's on the far left is your alternate arrangement because they alternate going down the stem. Obviously, I'm leaving out the petioles because art major I'm not, so please forgive me. I'm not even going to try to draw the world. A matter of fact, you know what? I knew I couldn't draw the world, so I brought you one. Okay, this is a mini Schefflera. And you see here the circular arrangement, don't you? And there are a lot of tropical plants that are world arrangement. And so really, you can probably go out in your yard and find a lot of these. And if you don't have a lot of plants in your yard or you live in an apartment, go to Home Depot or Lowe's or a nursery or something and take a look at some plants. Or the park. Don't grab the plants. They get real weird about that. Just look at them, right? Okay. And so you can find all sorts of different leaf arrangements there. Now the other thing that we needed to learn about the leaves is that they have differing shapes. And once again, when you look at the shape of this leaf, it actually, I know it looks like an elephant ear, but they don't give us that choice there, do they? So the one that I think it looks like is an upside down heart. If you were to turn it this way, it would look like a heart, wouldn't it? So which shape is this?
It's cordate.
Cordate, good, is the heart-shaped leaf. If a leaf is like a corn leaf, then it would be linear because it looks like a line. If it is long, but it's shaped where it tapers at either end, it's elliptical. If it's shaped like an oval, it's oval. That's so logical. Okay, if it's shaped like a triangle, because this is a delta in the Greek language, that's called the deltoid. because of the triangular shape. Okay, and that's why. I can't give you the logic on all of them, but I can give it to you on a few. The chordate would be the heart shape. Orbicular is its orbit, it's round. Okay, the orbicular is round. Lobed means that it's got some real heavy-duty indentations going on. This is definitely lobed, isn't it? Right? Heavy-duty lobed. And it's kind of rounded, and so that's why it would be lobed. Cleft would be more like what you see there, where it's a sharper indentation. These are more rounded indentations. The cleft is a sharper indentation. And then the needle-like would be what you would see on a pine tree or an evergreen. And then the scale-like, I'll try to bring you some scale-like next week. Cedar trees are a really good place to look for the scale-like leaves, and they really look scale-like, just like it appears here. Yes, sir?
Why do you have foil on that?
Oh, I was trying to make it so it didn't droop, but it did anyway. Okay, you know that if you break a piece of a plant off and don't give it water, very quickly it wilts because it loses its turgor pressure. You remember that? How the water gets in the central vacuole, and then it's like a box and sits it up. Well, when they lose water, they get all wimpy, and because their turgor pressure's gone. Okay, go ahead and turn the page, please. The margin of the leaf is the edge of the leaf, and depending on what type of plant it is, it could have an entire, which means that there are no indentations. It's just a matter of fact, this would be, I would say that this would be an elliptical leaf, and that it's an entire leaf margin because there's no serrations, no little cuts or anything. If it has little bitty cuts in it, like little bitty teeth, kind of like a steak knife, it's serrate just like a steak knife is serrated. Okay, little bitty teeth. If it's got big teeth and needs to go to the dentist, it's dentate. Okay? Sounds like dentist. It works. God bless you. If it's just got little bitty round ripples, it's called crenate. And if it's got big wavies, looks like it's undulating, it's called undulate. And that's because, God bless you, the Latin word for wave is unda. And so that's where they get that undulate and that name also for wave. And you do have to know how to identify these for your test. Excuse me. Now, this next part is very, very important because let's be honest. I'm ashamed to say most of us will forget these eventually if you're not a a botanist. You're not going to remember all these different things. But the veins are easy to remember, so let's try to at least remember those because they actually tell us some pretty cool things about a plant. I know it's weird, but they do. There are two basic types of veins. There's three listed there, but there are two basic types. One type is parallel venation, and that is when the veins all run parallel to the mid-rib, which is the main vein that comes off the petiole. If they all run parallel to one another, it's called parallel venation because they run parallel. That's very logical. I like that. If they don't do that, they are called netted. They are netted. Netted venation. Venation referring to the veins. Now the pinnate one that he mentions there, you have the midrib coming off the petiole, and then you just have the main veins coming off of that. That is the pinnate. Like the pinnacle of the temple. When Jesus stood on the pinnacle of the temple and Satan was tempting him after the 40 days. Do you remember that? When he was preparing for his ministry? And you remember he was on the pinnacle of the temple? That looks kind of like the pinnacle of the temple, doesn't it? So that's pinnate. Okay? The other one that he gives us is palmate, which is where you have a lot of main ones coming off the main one, and then it branches out from there. And this one, I always remember it because it looks like your hand. Your hand has several places where the fingers come off of palm, palmate. Palmate leaf looks something like that, doesn't it? So the pinnacle will have one main one, like the pinnacle of the temple, whereas the palmate one will have several, like the palm of your hand, and then the parallel will be very straight, and they'll run parallel to one another. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and mention this because we're not doing the on your owns, but on page 435 on the on your own 14.4, I've had a lot of people that looked at D and they go, how did they get linear entire there? And it's because it's linear because it's a corn leaf, but it's entire even though it looks like it's waving. It's not. It's just how the corn leaf is bent that makes it look that way. It is tricky, and so what does that mean? On your test, if you were to write there that that was the undulate, I would have given you credit because that's what it looks like. So you write down what it looks like, and if you know your stuff, you just know that I'm going to make sure you get credit if you're right about what it looks like, okay? Because I don't expect you to know, okay, well, that's a corn leaf and that's how it falls, so, you know. You don't have to know all that. Some people know how corn looks, some don't. It's okay, all right? And then it's up to you whether you do 14-1, and it would be helpful for you on your test, I'll tell you this right now, if you would go out and try to identify some leaves, some shapes, some margins, some arrangements, because you're going to have to be able to do that for your test. So you may want to practice that. On page 436, we have the microscopic cross-section of a leaf. So in other words, what we've done for this picture is they have cropped the leaf in half and microscopically looked at the side of the leaf. That's what we've done. Okay, so it's a cross-section. And I want you to notice the very top of the picture, you have epidermis. What kind of tissue of our 4 tissues would the epidermis be? Dermal, because it's that one single outside layer. On a plant, the epidermis can be waxy and look shiny. It can be hairy, like in an African violet or a stinging nettle, mean plants that they are. There's all sorts of different epidermises that God designed on plants, and most of the time they're for purpose of some sort, whether it be protection. The waxy ones hold in liquids, like in cacti and stuff like that. And then the hairs usually provide protection for them. So you can see all sorts of weird protection coming out of the epidermis. Right below the epidermis, you have what is actually the parenchyma tissue, and the parenchyma is where photosynthesis predominantly occurs. I want you to notice that right under the epidermis, the type of parenchyma you have there is called Palisade Mesophyll. Why? Because it's very tightly packed together, and I had some of my male students actually tell me, because they knew the difference between all the forts in olden times. And Palisade forts were the ones that they built kind of like this, where they had the wood upright going side by side. It always makes me think of Williamsburg and places like that. You know, the original forts when they came here. That's a palisade fort. So that arrangement is considered a palisade arrangement. So if you look at the cells right under the epidermis, you will notice that they are stacked almost like a palisade fort, aren't they? And those are your Palisade Mesophyll. That's why they're called that. And then below that, you notice that all of a sudden there seems to be a lot more space in between the cells after 2 layers of the Palisade Mesophyll. That is the spongy mesophyll. And it looks spongy, doesn't it? Why? What does a sponge have in it? Holes. And what do we see in the spongy mesophyll? Holes. Okay, now let's think about this for a minute. These are both areas where photosynthesis occurs in these parenchyma tissues. And the top of the leaf, if it's a normal leaf, the vast majority of leaves, the top of the leaf has the Palisade Mesophyll in it, which is very tightly packed together. And that's actually why the top of the leaf looks a much darker green than the underside, doesn't it? Here you can see both, so you can compare. And you see that the upper side of this leaf is much darker green than the underside of the leaf. That's because the upper side has the Palisade Mesophyll in the tissue, and then the spongy mesophyll in the lower portion of the tissue. Now the Palisade Mesophyll, remember, that's all trying to get sun and photosynthesize, but wait a minute, if they're packed one on top of the other, how are they going to get sun? Does anybody remember? Okay, the chloroplasts are moving in there. They're actually moving. I'm sure I've told you before that that was the one of the 2 things I remember from my botany class in college was when we went to lab one night. I remember it was dark outside. It was cold, being a Floridian. That's what got to me. And we're in lab, and I didn't want to be there. Let's be honest. I wanted to be any place else but in this botany lab. And it's bad attitude. I'm so repentant. And I sat down. See, that should have cued me because I really enjoyed the microscope then. At the time, I was an animal and dairy science major, wanted to be a large animal vet, didn't realize what God had in mind. So I'm thinking, botany, you know. And so, shame on my attitude. I sat down and I looked under the microscope, and it had been on for a little while, so the light had been warming the leaf. And this was from a live section, and I'll never forget, because you know me, I'm loud. I sat down, looked under, and went, oh, look at all the little green footballs. They look like a bunch of little green footballs doing a little train thing. They all chased each other around. It was so cool. The whole lab cracked up, and then everybody got back to work. But those those chloroplasts, remember they're what holds the chlorophyll, they actually will rotate around one another in the cell so that even though they're stacked like that, it's very efficient and they can get the sunlight and then they can keep going, and that's where photosynthesis occurs. The spongy mesophyll is spongy. Why? Why is it important that there are spaces, which we would call holes, between the spongy mesophyll and the lower portion of most leaves? Yes?
So the carbon dioxide can get in?
Gas exchange, exactly right. You have to have room for the gas exchange because remember, you guys learned a long time ago that photosynthesis was sucking up the water. Remember that? Sucking up the water. The plant breathes in carbon dioxide, gets the sunshine, and it produces glucose plus oxygen, and then we go back and add our sixes. Remember that? Okay? And so we have to have this gas exchange going on. We have to have carbon dioxide coming in. We have to have oxygen going out. And if you don't have it coming in, this is usually coming up through the roots because actually we've already learned that in transpiration the plant actually has water evaporating from its leaves, and that's through the stomata, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the spongy mesophyll, thank you, it's because there needs to be gas exchange in these leaves so photosynthesis can occur. Now, plants also have microscopic nostrils. And they're called stomata. You can tell I'm an animal person. The stomata are like the leaf's nostrils. And they have nostrils like a camel or a beaver, where they can close them and open them. Oh, so cool. Okay? And so the guard cells are the cells around the stomata being just the hole, or you could put the nostril of the leaf. I will give you full credit. And the guard cells are the little cells that open and close around these nostrils of the leaf. Now get this. If there's plenty of water, the cells absorb the water, swell up, and when they swell up, it pushes them apart and it opens the nostril. If there's not enough water, then they shrivel and then they come together and they close the nostril. And that's very important because if the plant doesn't have enough water, then it needs to stop photosynthesizing because it actually loses some water in the process of photosynthesizing, plus it requires water to photosynthesize, and so it will stop photosynthesizing. Now, this explains a lot at my house. My plants aren't taken care of very well because everybody depends on me to do it and I'm busy. And so if you've ever noticed your plant turn yellow, but you think, man, it's in a window, it's got plenty of sun, why is it turning yellow? That poor thing doesn't have enough water, and so it's turning yellow because its stomata have closed, the guard cells have closed the stomata, so it has stopped photosynthesizing, so it's turning yellow on you even though it's got plenty of sunshine. Oh, that explains a lot, doesn't it? Okay, and then at the very bottom, you have not only the guard cells, but you have more epidermal tissue down there also. Yes, sir?
One of my dad's friends, he said that too much water can also make them...
Oh, too much water will drown them.
Can make them turn yellow, so...
But because it drowns them. Yes, that's never been the problem with my plants. My plants usually don't get enough attention. It's not overly attentive. Okay? But maybe you've overwatered your plants. I don't know. Plants are kind of finicky. They want a certain amount of water and nutrients. It's just like if you put too much fertilizer on them, they go, and they die. Right? And then you guys all learned about osmosis. It's because it just sucks all the liquid right out of them because there's more concentration of solids on the outside than the inside, and it just pulls everything out of them. So you do have to be kind of careful with them. My plants are lucky to get watered, so. And I really like plants. Don't get me wrong. I'm just a very busy person. I'm better at cooking plants and eating plants and things, All right, on page 438 and 439. Did you have a question?
Yeah. We had a couple of plants in our backyard, and they were all the same, and they all got the same amount of sun, same amount of fertilizer, same amount of everything. And one of them just exploded. It went crazy. It was huge.
Oh, okay. Sometimes that's somewhere near the end of a pipe or something. And so, I know that you live in town. I know that, so you don't have a drain field. But people that have a drain field in their yard, any plant that actually is near the end of the drain field will grow like a maniac because it's getting more nutrients than the plants around it. So depending on what kind of, runoff you're getting there, it could be feeding that plant more than the plants around it. You don't know. I don't know because I'd have to kind of come look at it with you and see if we could figure it out. Okay, let's do leaf color. And he's got some very pretty pictures here of some different leaf colors. I showed you some big green leaves, but you guys are all aware leaves do come in other colors. I brought you just a very minor example of some other colors. Some leaves look a little on the red side. There are plants with purple leaves. I have seen them. I don't know their names. I'm sorry. Here he gives you the example of the European beech that has a purple leaf. And then we have the lovely example of the colors of the leaves in the autumn, which we don't see here in Florida, particularly here in South Florida. If you go to North Florida, you can see a little of this, but here in South Florida, we don't have any of this. If you have a deciduous tree here in South Florida, it just looks like it's dying, and then it looks real pretty in the spring. The tree that comes to my mind immediately that does this is the cypress tree, which we have a lot of down here, and I personally love cypress trees for that very reason. They actually lose their leaves, and then in the spring they look so green because it's just the new shoots and they're brilliant and green. These leaves are very pretty. How many of you have ever had the privilege of seeing the leaves change someplace where they get very brilliantly colored? Yeah, you live there. We have a visitor from Cape Cod, so he can totally relate to this. And so some of us have done that. When I first went away to college, I was 18. I went to Auburn University for the first 2 years. That is in Alabama, and that fall, as I drove between Auburn and Atlanta, which I did a lot because I had a relative in Atlanta at the time, I would drive over those big hills, and I would have a hard time watching the road because I'd be so busy going, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. Drove my roommate nuts. She's like, would you watch the road? You know, and she's like raised up there. She's going, this person is sick. But to me, this was so cool. Wow, look at the colors, you know, so, because I'm not used to all that stuff. And so they can get some very pretty colors. Now, here we actually find out why. Once again, a deciduous plant, turn to page 441. A deciduous plant is a plant that loses its leaves once a year. If it loses its leaves, it's because it has an abscission layer. So it's not that it just decides. Okay, it's genetically programmed by God to have an abscission layer. The abscission layer actually is a layer between the petiole and the stem that when the days start to shorten, so the light cycle shortens, that will start to cut the vascular system off of the leaf. And so when that vascular system, in other words, it's no longer got the xylem coming into it, okay, then it starts to die. And in the process of it dying, the book tells us, depending on whether it's in a cold, sunny climate, then it'll make more anthocyanins, and because of the pH, it will get different colors. If it's in a cloudy, warmer environment, then it apparently won't be as colorful, but you still get some colors. And I realize I skipped over the colors, so let's do this. Chlorophyll gives us our green color. And then the yellows and the oranges come from carotenoids. Easy to remember, sounds like carrot. Carotenoid, okay? And it's orange or yellow. And then the anthocyanins, which we're going to play with right now, they are actually a group of pigments that are pH sensitive, and they're sensitive. And so if you play with them, they'll actually turn 4 different colors. And so they can give the leaves all sorts of purples and yellows. And well, the yellows and the oranges are the carotenoids. But you can see all these cool colors through that. There's reds and stuff like that. Everybody in front of you, you have some what looks like blue water. That is actually red cabbage juice that has been boiled. And then you also, on each table, it was a red cabbage. It's really purple, but they call them red cabbage. It's just like white grapes are really green, aren't they? So we won't go there. You also have white vinegar on your table, and you have ammonia. They look alike. So I would suggest you very carefully smell one. Don't stuff your nose down in the ammonia. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to start down on number 11 in your lab, and it tells you that you're going to add 5 drops of ammonia. And you're going to need to stir this while you're doing it. He tells you that you will continue to do that until you get to a green color, and it will look green. Then you're going to add drops of the vinegar. Follow the directions, swirling that, And you're going to note the color change. That's what you don't want to do, right? You're going to note the color changes. You should be able to see 4 color changes. So you're going to go slowly like he says, or you're going to miss one. One is a very sensitive color change. The other ones are pretty solid. They're there for a while, okay? The colors you should see, besides this blue, are green, purple, and then the far end is pink. Once you get to purple, keep going. You want to get all the way to pink.
2.
Oh, do it by the dropper fill. Just do it by the dropper full.
Okay.
For speed. And figure there's like 5 drops in a dropper full. Maybe 8. There we go.
Which one is that? Right, we're going to go back eventually. Okay, here we go. Or we can just saying it.
You can go the other way then. You getting the pink?
Yeah.
You can stir, Michael, here. Just stir. It might be easier. Okay, sweetie? Oh, yeah, you got blue. Very nice. Oh, going to green. Right? Very nice. And now if you want, you can go the other way. Now if you go carefully, you might see the colors in between, but we'll see. Go ahead and start stirring while he puts it in.
Just hold the bowl.
Yeah, go ahead.
Start spinning.
Whoa, stir, stir, stir. Yep, it went. Already went. See, it goes, it jumps over that blue coming down.
Like that, it's got all those colors together.
That's pretty. So that's actually blue, and if you keep going, now we've got green. Okay, and then if we go back the other way, I know I'm being bad here, but for speed. And now we've got our green. We're going to go back with our vinegar. See that?
It goes back to purple.
Very quickly, didn't it?
Yeah.
We skipped the blue. I think the blue is actually the short one.
Yeah.
And then it'll go to the purple, and it'll go all the way back to this color, which is the pink. You're supposed to write up that lab. What we see there is that anthocyanins can actually, depending on the pH, give us 4 different colors, can't they? Very pretty green, very pretty blue. I think they're all pretty colors. The purple and the pink. I've actually used red cabbage juice to try to do a healthy version of dyeing Easter eggs. Because it always freaks me out that my kids eat those eggs after they put dye on them. Because some of it seeps through, you know that. So I've tried this and used white vinegar to do the one way, and I used pickle juice to make it go the other way. Well, because I didn't want them to eat ammonia. You know, that would have been worse than the dye. So anyway, and it does work, but you have to leave the eggs in there almost overnight for them to pick up the color because it takes a while. But it does work. So anyway, so deciduous plants have to have an abscission layer. That means that evergreens do not have an abscission layer, and that's why they're evergreen. Does anybody remember what the purpose of being a deciduous tree is for that tree? There's a survival technique that's going on here for a tree that loses its leaves during the winter time. Did anybody get that from the reading? It's because they're ready for having a very small water supply. And so it's a way for them to actually get through a time period when the plant usually will have very small water supplies, so to conserve water. And that's why they actually have the abscission layer and go through that. If the leaf just turns brown, it's tannic acid. Actually, that's why here in Florida we have a lot of what are called black rivers and blackwater rivers, and I think they're probably all through the south. They may be up north too. I don't know. Do you guys have blackwater rivers up north? Anyway, we do, and they're called blackwater rivers because the tannic acid from the tree roots actually colors the water brown like tea. The water just looks, it's clean. It's just as clean as it can be. You can see right through it, but the water looks brown because of the tannic acid in it. All right, then we get to roots on page 442, and we have different types of roots. He mentions here that some are for aerial plants, and I just had a little air plant outside that I grabbed this morning, and these would be, this is an epiphyte that he mentioned, and this would be your aerial roots, so this would just sit on another plant like an orchid would. It is not parasitic, it does not feed into the other plant, it just sits on top of it, uses the nutrients that might gather where the plant has different detritus that might fall in there and water. So that's an aerial root. Other roots actually go into the ground, you know that. Some will climb things. And so there's all sorts of different types of roots.
Are those the scale leaves?
No, that's not a scaly leaf. That's a good question. This is actually a linear. That would be a linear leaf.
Okay. What are the things at the top?
This is a flower. This is a flowering plant. Epiphytes are actually flowering plants. That's what orchids are, and we're going to study those in the next chapter. Okay? I also brought you, this is a Staghorn Fern leaf, but it's got pretty neat parallel venation. But then it hit me, I wonder if it's really a fern. And if it is, then it's a bryophyte. And yeah, so anyway, we're going to talk about that next week. But the poor staghorn, I grabbed it one this morning. Anyway, okay, there's three things that roots actually do for the plant. We're told that they absorb water and nutrients, they anchor the plant, and they're actually for food storage. We eat a lot of plant roots. Those of us that eat carrots, that's a plant root. Beets are a plant root. Now immediately people go to taters, precious, but that's not a root. A potato is actually an underground stem, which explains a lot. That's why the little leaves come out of it where the eyes are, doesn't it? And then an onion is actually underground leaves. Ooh, that explains a lot too, doesn't it? Because that's why it's got all those layers. And so, but we do eat a lot of where the plant stores the food in the actual the vegetables would be where it stores the food in turnips. That's another one a lot of you probably have never even had, but turnips are also storage in the root. And then he tells us that there's a lot more root to a plant than what's above the ground. That if you had an 8 to 10 foot corn plant, that if you put all of its roots end to end, it would actually be 150 feet of roots. That's a lot more roots than 8 to 10 feet. And so there's a lot more root than there is plant above the ground. Now there are two basic types of roots. There are tap roots, which is very similar, here's the ground, which is very similar to a carrot with little hairs coming off of it. And then the other type of root looks like a bush underneath the ground, and that's a fibrous root. And so the two types of roots are tap roots or fibrous roots. And we have a lot of trees that have these kind of roots. Actually, pine trees have tap roots, and oak trees have fibrous roots. And that's why in a really wet time period, we don't have as many big oaks down here, but we've had hurricanes where you've seen after the hurricane all those big banyan trees were over. That's because they have fibrous roots. These trees that have tap roots, man, they just stand there. Blah, blah. They're just like, you know, palm trees, pine trees. You notice none of them fell over during the hurricane. And places where they don't have hurricanes, when I lived up in the Ocala area, we had big oak trees, and it rained for like a week and a half one time. And one morning we hear crash, and this big oak tree had just fallen over, hundreds of years old. It just fallen over because the ground was so wet, and these fibrous roots just weren't enough to hold that big a tree up. And by the grace of God, it missed our house, but it did take our fence out. Anyway, and so these root systems differ. Look on page 444. Here, if you took one of these root hairs and you cut it longwise, so you're looking at it, here's the root hair, and you've cut it longwise, that's what you would see. The very bottommost part of the root hair, it tells us, is the root cap, which is dead tissue because it's pushing through the ground. Right behind it is the meristematic region. That's what we looked at when we studied mitosis, and we looked at the onion root. We looked at the meristematic region, and that's why we saw all the different cells that were in mitosis stages there. Behind that, so up higher, we see the elongation region. There, the cells are beginning to differentiate, and they're stretching out, thus the name elongation. And then at the upper region, it's mature. Here they're fully developed. Root hairs are starting to come out of it. It's to increase the surface area so that it can have more absorption. Now if we took that same root and instead of cutting it this way, we cut it this way and looked at the cross section, you get the picture on the right hand side. And what that shows us is that a root on the very outside edge has an epidermis, remember dermal tissue. Then it has a cortex, which is actually where it stores the food if the root's used for storage. Then in the very center part, you have a little circle, and it's on the right-handmost picture. You have the little circle with the X in it. That is the vascular tissue. The X is actually made up of xylem. The phloem is the little area in between the parts of the X. It's got a little circle of endodermis, which is still dermal tissue, but it's like a little protective layer to protect what's going into the xylem and the phloem of the plant, hoping to keep out anything that might hurt the plant. And then in between it has the pericycle, which is undifferentiated tissue, so that would be meristematic tissue. And then it has a vascular cambium, which can turn into xylem or phloem, whatever the root actually needs, that can turn into. If you'll turn the page, I'll tell you what we'll do is we're going to do stems next week, And then next week we're also going to do all the microscope labs. So before you move, you're going to go from stems through the rest of the chapter. We have a major microscope lab next week with all sorts of slides to look at. Make sure you do your study guide. Be ready for that. We have to clean up before you leave. And have a Jesus-filled week.